Should the U.S. Leverage aid to Israel to encourage them to stop annexing West Bank settlements?
I think that I know this issue really well. My father was from Iran. He left a country of dictatorship for a country of freedom. I've been educated on the Middle East. I've traveled to Israel. I've traveled to Egypt. I've traveled to Turkey. I've been to 40 different countries. I think that we have to have a two-state solution. The Israelis and the Palestinians both have rights to a homeland. The Palestinians need to have a homeland. I think the United States has to play a critical role. The parties have to negotiate this. I don't think we should tie our aid to specific policies for the Israelis or the Palestinians. I think we need to be giving more aid to encourage a peace process, especially for economic development in Palestine. I think it's really important for the United States to understand that when we have played the role as an honest broker, when we've encouraged the parties to talk, you make progress. You saw that with Camp David. You saw that with the Oslo Accords. You saw it with President Clinton, with Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin. When we aren't engaged, like the Trump administration now is not engaging with the Palestinians at all, and their peace proposal was dead on arrival. We have to listen to the legitimate claims of both sides. We have to push for a two-state solution. And I know this area. If I'm elected, I will be a voice for peace. And I believe that if we have the right policies, again, the people in Israel and Palestine want peace. If you look at the average people, they understand that they have to get out of this cycle. There's a possibility there to actually have a breakthrough. I believe that.
Yes. Well, every aid that we extend, especially military aid, to any country in the world must be conditioned on the basics of civil rights and human rights and justice, both at home and abroad. I believe that both the Palestinian and the Israeli people deserve justice and deserve to live with dignity. And I believe that we play a role in the decisions that we make in aiding countries, and for Israel, we play a role to get them to do the right thing. We cannot be contributors to unjust war. We must be contributors to peace.
Yeah. So the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is really complex and very nuanced. It goes back generations. So I find what, in my experiences, it seems as though that there's this generational trauma, that this incredible tension, these deaths that have occurred on both sides have led to this emotional buildup that's passed on to the next generation. But what I'm finding from my own experience, though, is that we're seeing some really innovative solutions by young adults in Generation Z in trying to not only bridge the logistical gaps, but also the emotional gaps. For instance, I worked at Our Generation Speaks, which was founded by an Israeli special forces operator who, after seeing the suffering of Palestinians, started his own business incubator to bring Palestinians and Israelis together to start businesses together. And just that incubator alone allows these emotional gaps to be broken. So I really believe that while I think it's delicate to talk about the logistical issues and perhaps even bringing back the 67 borders to ensure that there's a more equitable distribution of land, I'm really, from my perspective, more concerned about the emotional bridging of these populations, and think that that's really going to be a major bottleneck that we need to overcome.
So this obviously is a tough question. And first, I'd like to share my general view. Right? Unfortunately, in many parts of life, things are gray. I think we've got to be very careful to continue to strongly support our ally in Israel. And I'm a strong supporter of our alliance. They are a strong democracy in a part of the world where there are very few democracies. And we have many shared values, and I think we've got to remember that and strongly support them. But just as we do with our family and our friends, when they make decisions that we don't agree with, I think we've got to be prepared to directly discuss those with them and take any actions that are appropriate. The specific area that you're talking about in terms of the West Bank, I think it's important for us to engage them much more directly about changing some of their policies and if necessary, um, take other actions such as looking at our aid. But again, it's very important for us to remember that the security of Israel is extremely important to us, not just from our position in the Middle East, but also because of our support of democracy throughout the world. So I'm much more of a believer in engaging in serious discussions of trying to actually fix the root problem with them rather than applying a stick.
First of all, the strong and special relationship between the United States and Israel is the cornerstone of peace and security throughout the Middle East. And in order to protect that relationship, the safety and security of Israel must always be a nonpartisan issue. And I reject all efforts to politicize it. To ensure lasting peace and security for Israel, I support finding a two-state solution. And I also believe that the United States has to return to its role as an honest broker rather than pushing an overtly political agenda without engaging both sides. Where it comes to the direct question you asked, I don't believe that we should condition aid to Israel. The United States aid to Israel has been the bedrock of our relationship with Israel, which is the bedrock of democracy in the Middle East. And our aid to Israel has been something that not only serves their national security interests, but also our national security interests. And I don't believe that we should be trying to use that as some sort of a tool and reject those particular cries and efforts.
So I certainly don't support any continued expansion of settlements, and the conversation around annexation, I think, is one that is not in the best interest of peace. I believe that the United States needs to drive a conversation toward a two-state solution, but ultimately any peace must be negotiated by those two parties, must be negotiated by Israel and Palestine, and we should encourage that, we should foster that, we should use the tools in our toolkit to be supportive of that, but it's those two states that have to have those negotiations and negotiate a peace for themselves.
Yes. I don't believe that Israel is the total evil person here, evil party to that thing. I mean, the Palestinians have got their share of bad baggage too. I mean, if you're not a Muslim, some of them want to kill you, but Israel has got to stop annexing West Bank settlements too.
Yeah. So, like I'm sure a lot of people watching this is a really personal issue for a lot of us. I mean, I have friends and family in Israel. I'm a Jewish American, and I think here's where I start on this. I think it's really important to remember that there are human beings in Israel, and that there are human beings in Palestine, and that both of them want to live lives of peace and security and raise their families. And I think that that's a really important thing to remember. So look, I'm happy to, I hope I'm not jumping the gun. I think I'm down the path with J Street, which is an organization that I care deeply about, that's looking to make pre-endorsements, so they might endorse multiple candidates in a number of races, including this one. But it's people who are fundamentally committed to what I believe is the only long-term answer to peace and stability in the region, which is a two-state solution. And I think it is, frankly, a tragedy and despicable that the Trump administration withdrew from the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan, otherwise known as the Iran nuclear deal, which was hammered out when I was in the White House, because I do think that Iran poses the biggest existential threat to the future of Israel. A nuclear Iran would be a disaster for the region, and a disaster for a region that's frankly had too many of them. And I think pulling out of that deal with no replacement and no alternative and no strategy was horrifying. and not surprising from an administration that I don't think has a foreign policy, particularly when it comes to this region. Now, when you ask about conditioning aid, I think that that's a tough question. I don't think that we are friends and partners and allies with the state of Israel. I also do support humanitarian aid to Palestinians. I support being a convener. I support bringing them back together to the table to negotiate, to hammer out these agreements. And I frankly agree that the settlement expansion is an enormous barrier to the two-state solution, to peace, which is what we all want. So look, I would have been happy to sign that resolution that was passed in the House calling for an end to those plans. But when it comes to the rest of it, to conditioning aid, I think our job as the United States is to be a convener, is to bring people together, and I don't think that that's necessarily a step that we need to take right now. But I do think that the biggest danger to my friends and family in Israel, the biggest danger to the future of any peace and stability in that region, is this continued nonsense where we make a two-state solution harder and harder, and we encourage people to think that peace is impossible. It's not, but we have to work toward it.
So that's a good question, and it's a complicated question, and it's also personal for me. So my husband, his mother was born in Jerusalem. She is Palestinian, and his father is Lebanese. And I know I have spent a number of years in Lebanon with the United Nations, working with other Arab states, and I know deeply that the Israeli-Palestinian question is a painful one for both sides. We have failed both the Palestinians and the Israelis, and because it was personal for me when my twins are 3 years old, when I was deciding which school to put them in, I've put them in Temple Israel. And that was because I needed them to grow up to understand that people who are Jewish, people who have Israeli heritage, some of their friends do there, the common sense of, a shared dignity, a shared hope, and a shared fears. So the questions about what the US does have to be grounded in protecting the human rights of Israelis and Palestinians. Solutions to date have failed. The Trump administration has actually done more harm, I think, than good. And discrimination is on the rise. That includes anti-Semitism in the US, but also anti-Palestinian sort of actions in Israel. So if we go back to the basics, the human rights, build trust, and accept that we can only start finding a solution if there's joint collaboration and dignity and respect, I think that's the only way forward.
Military aid to Israel is not negotiable. That $3.5 billion that we spend annually is two things. One, it is a moral and sacrosanct compact with a deeply loyal and important American partner in the Middle East, a democracy, one that has the same liberal values that we do about an independent judiciary and the inherent human dignity of all people. And I'm not willing to use that military aid as leverage for them to change behavior, even behavior that we disagree with. I'd also say that $3.5 billion is the single best ROI of any foreign aid that the United States spends in terms of keeping American soldiers out of harm's way. The IDF does a darn good job of taking care of their own security. And without those funds, we might find Americans in harm's way. So while I strongly support a two-state solution and one that secures the sovereignty and the prosperity and dignity of the Palestinian people, I'm not willing to use military aid as a piece of leverage in that negotiation.
So a couple things on this question. First of all, I just think the way the question is asked is not probably appropriate because there hasn't been yet annexing of West Bank settlements. And let's be very clear, I'm a very staunch supporter of Israel, and I don't think we should have any conditions on aid. First of all, I don't know if most people realize that 90% of the security assistance that is given to Israel is actually Israel is employing US companies and paying US companies for that security assistance. So that money is staying within the US economy. Secondly, when it comes to settlements, let's be very clear. Settlements are not the issue or obstacle to peace. Those who wanted to destroy Israel were there before the settlement started happening in 1967, and they continue to be, calling for the existential wipeout of Israel. So settlements aren't the problem, but let's be very also clear. The Palestinian Authority and Israel have agreed in multiple times, somewhere between 6 and 8 times, to what land swaps were going to happen within the West Bank. Everyone knows what those are going to be, starting at Oslo and all the way up to the current administration. So if Israel is dealing with those large settlements that will always be part of its territory that has been agreed to multiple times, I have no issues with that. I do have issues, though, when Israel tries to extend that into new settlements within the West Bank that have not yet been in those major areas, because they don't think that's right. And I think we need to make sure that the Palestinians also get their state and have their inspirational nationhood taken care of as well.